morning and welcome to Guided Meditations and More. My name is Ade Richardson and I'm your host. And this is Guided Meditations and More is originally began around the time COVID hit New York, when it really started to spread, I think back in March. And I started the page to offer guided meditations to people who would find it useful, and especially at that time, there was a lot of people that were going through and still going through stress from being isolated, not being able to continue their normal routines and be involved in the community. So I started this guided meditation page at that time, and it eventually evolved into the podcast, which I enjoy a lot. So the guided meditations and Guided Meditations and More podcasts is a place where I interview a variety types of people on various topics, ranging from spirituality. I've had professors on, artists, photographers. Actually, our guest today is an artist, as well as other things. And I've also interviewed, one of my guests has a coffee business, and that's one of the things I really love. Coffee. I'm a big fan. So enough from me. So today I have the great pleasure to be here with David Gilbank. Welcome, David. Nice to have you here.
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
So I was introduced to David through, well, I first saw your interview through Tom with the Weather podcast, with your interview with David Godman. You interviewed David Godman, who I'm a big fan of. Yes. I have a few of his books, and we'll get into the Ramana Maharshi thing maybe a little bit as well in the interview.
Sure.
And then we met through Facebook, and I spoke at a meeting that you were running, and so we've had conversation back and forth, and so I look forward to this opportunity to sit down with you and hear a little bit about your journey. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to start with your bio, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So David Gilbank is an award-winning filmmaker and screenwriter. He created the world's largest Facebook directory for 12-step recovery Zoom meetings, AA Zoom Global List, the Women's International Marathon, AA Zoom meeting for women that have been running nonstop since May 2020, and the International Shivering Denizens online meetings that occur 4 times every day all over the world. David has been sober since 2002, enjoys rugby league, cricket, and music of Nick Cave and Don McLean. He was born in Australia but lives in Europe. So, are you still playing rugby?
I stopped before the lockdown. I think it was in 2019. I stopped. It was my last game. I got injured. I got a bit of a back injury. But yeah, I still played. Yeah, I'd still play now. I love it. I love watching it, and I love playing it. And, yeah, I played to the age of 51. Yeah, so I kept on playing. So.
Oh wow, that's great. Yeah, back injuries can be really tricky and debilitating. How is it now?
Yeah, it's much better, but the lack of exercise is telling. So I'm getting back into it. So after lockdown, through lockdown, I kind of ate too many pies, and now I'm sort of back into the realm of eating properly and exercising and stuff. So I'm getting back into it. It's hard. I've loved competitive sport all my life,
Hmm.
which is which is a part of my journey, and not exercising is difficult for me because I found that was a great way of a great release for me.
Yeah.
But I love, yeah, I love sport. I've always loved sport.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. I played basketball pretty much all of my life, and until I got knee injury,
Yeah,
and then I tore my calf muscle. I was trying to keep up with the younger folks on the mind was saying, well, I can still do it, still play
yeah,
as hard as I did before in the same way. And I was for a time, but then I jumped for the ball one day and I just heard a pop, and
yeah,
that was it. So
yeah.
let's get right into the conversation,
Sure.
about your journey. So I guess let's start at the beginning. Where were you born? Where are you from? Where did you begin?
Well, I was born in a small country town in the northern New South Wales state of Australia called Murwillumbah.
Mhm.
And I didn't live there, but my parents were on the way back from something. I think I'm not entirely sure what happened, but we stopped off there on the way, and then my mother had me, and then we hightailed it back up to Queensland, and I was kind of raised in and all around Queensland. It's a northern state. If you look on the map of Australia, it's the big pointy bit on the east coast at the top, and it's sort of subtropical and tropical. And I moved all around there. My father was a school teacher. My mother was a matron of hospitals and nursing homes, and they lived for a long time. We grew up all around there. Really, it's always nice and warm, generally speaking, and unless it's this time of year around, But yeah, if it's that's yeah. So Queensland, and lived a life of a pretty typical Aussie kid, really. Just lots of sport, lots of outdoor activity. Yeah, 1970s, 1980s upbringing, I guess, pretty much standard across the Western world, I guess.
Yeah, and growing up, how were things with you? Was there you go through, I guess, the normal teenage stuff, or was there anything in particular that stuck out for you that was difficult in your development early on?
Yeah, well, it's I wouldn't say on the surface, like I said, on the surface I probably had a standard kind of Australian upbringing in suburbia, I guess you could call it, and it was nice. It's a nice sort of nation where it's quite new. Everything's new. All the roads are new. All the buildings are new, but the issues are old and the same. And I was brought up in a pretty much an alcoholic household. My mother is a chronic alcoholic. Well, she died recently. She was a chronic drinker, and there was a lot of issues when I was younger. There was a lot of stuff that I don't necessarily need to go in right now, but there was a lot of there's a fair bit of dysfunction. There was a fair bit of dysfunction in my childhood and my upbringing, and I guess from my own point of view, and forgetting all of that, is that I never felt that I was part of things. I always felt separate to everything. I didn't feel like I belonged, and was very self-conscious as a child growing up. I think I never felt that I belonged to. I guess, yeah, I just never felt like I belonged to anyone, and I can vividly remember going to school, like birthday parties, and not feeling part of the gang, not feeling part of what was going on, and feeling separate, and being, like I say, being self-conscious. And looking back, it kind of, I think it's for a lot of people who are seekers, um, you're blessed or cursed with this sort of feeling of being in the now, of being self-conscious and being aware. And I think I've been aware for quite a long time, and by that I mean I'm aware of being aware. I'm aware of being alive,
Mm.
and a lot of people would say that that's probably the same for them, but for me, I wasn't so much caught up in the distraction. And from an early age, I used to think about things like what happens at the end of the universe. Just little, as a kid, you're growing up, you're thinking, wow, what's infinity mean? It's all those sort of things. You're thinking
Yeah.
there was a lot of abstract thought, and I would, and it's kind of, as a child, you think, if there's no end to anything, what does that mean? An infinite universe. So, and I was brought up on a solid diet of science fiction and fantasy and things, and I loved my science fiction, You know, I can't tell you the day that Star Wars came out in a little country, you know, in Brisbane, which, you
Yeah.
know, isn't known for being the cultural center of the universe. And that's with respect to anyone who's from Brisbane, because I love Brisbane and I go back there regularly. But, you know, seeing Star Wars at the cinema, and was, for me as a kid there, was just like, this is amazing. And I just loved the escapism of it. And I certainly was always interested in an alternative reality. And I was always interested in that there might be something more to life than a lot of the issues that I was facing as a child. Like I said, I felt I had low self confidence and low
Mm.
self esteem, and I think by and large was that awareness, you know, because you're sort of given this gift or this power or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I think of being aware, and you don't know what to do with it. It's like somebody gives you, you don't know what a gun is, and it's a warm gun, and you're thinking, what do I do with this? And
Mm.
you can either drop it or point it at your head or do whatever. And I kind of pointed it at my head a little bit, that, and I just started the process of investigation, I guess, and finding out, you know, who I was. And I was always interested in things that other people weren't interested in. That's for sure. That's
Yeah.
absolutely for sure. I was interested in the meaning of life. I was always on a spiritual seeker. But the, but obviously, and it's interesting because my father, um, who's still alive now, he went to a Catholic private school in Brisbane. And in those days, and I don't, you know, I'm sure people are aware that in the old days, well, maybe not so much the old days, not till just recently, really,
Hmm.
those schools, they were pretty brutal with the children, pretty brutal with the students. And he was forever, his religious outlook or his spiritual outlook was forever tarred by the brutality that he was shown by those priests and people that there. And he hated religion, and he
Yeah.
hated any kind of stuff. And I always tell this story. It's a funny one for me. Was I remember in the western suburbs of Brisbane, there's this. It's quite a major thing. It's called the Toowong Cemetery,
Mm.
Toowong Cemetery, and it's kind of a landmark. And when you used to drive from my little suburbia bit with my dad in the car, you'd go past Toowong Cemetery on the Western Freeway, and you'd see this, and it was like all these people in tombstones, and at the top there was this big plinth, like an old, you know, and obviously it's not that old because Australia's not that old, but it was a big kind of thing. And I just remember saying to my dad in the car one day when I must have been 6 or 7, and I said, "What's that thing up there?" And he said, "Oh, that's a cemetery." "And what's that?" And I said, "Somebody's buried there." And I said to him, I said, "What happens when you die?" And he said, "Nothing. You die, everything goes black, and that's it. It's all
Oh,
over."
wow.
I
Yeah.
remember feeling terrified. Yeah, I was terrified. And it was like, God, well, that's a hell of a thing to say to a 6 and 7 year old. But I just, like, there was a futility. But I've never, I guess it's one of those things. It's a curse and and, um, and a good thing is that
Yeah.
I've never really listened to what people say. So I've tried to make up my own mind. And so I was always interested in that kind of thing. What happens when you die? What happens in the universe? Is there any kind of thing behind the curtain? Are there mysteries that need to be uncovered? So I've always been looking for those things, you know. So all the way through my my childhood and into my teens, you know, I remember reading Herman Hesse, Siddhartha, and stuff, and you know, reading books about things, you know, from everything from science fiction to the meaning of life to Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance and books
Mm.
like that. And I was just so, and I did a study of religion in my final year at school, at the school I went to in Brisbane. I was interested in it, and I remember vividly. And one of my favourite films is 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I mean
Yeah.
that had a profound effect on me. That had a profound effect on me because and and it still has a profound effect on me today. I mean, it's not for everyone's taste. I know. I showed it to my girlfriend recently, and she thought it was pretty boring. I think I'm not sure she didn't. I don't. I think she appreciated it, but it's not a modern film. It's one
Yeah.
for. I think you know, in the '60s it was one for all the hippies to get stoned and watch at the cinema and, you know, speculate on the meaning of life and stuff. But there was always something that resonated with me about that film. There's always
Yeah.
something. There's so many layers, and again, it had a profound effect on me, as have many films that I
Yeah.
seem to have got messages from, and rightly or wrongly taken a lead from those films. And for me, 2001 is probably the greatest spiritual film known to mankind. I think it's a work of art, a work of genius, and its message is still there today. And I still think about it today. It's kind of my canon. I think it's my go-to thing when I think about things. I think about the book by Arthur C. Clarke, which is fantastic. Who was
Mm.
another writer that I loved, and
Yeah.
was just so amazing. And by the way, I think was an atheist or an
Oh, wow.
agnostic at the very least. And
Yeah.
but yeah, but Stanley Kubrick. I mean, Arthur C. Clarke. I read a lot about Arthur C. Clarke, and he. I remember him writing something. He said that all the world's problems would be solved when religion was wiped off the face of the earth.
Mm.
So obviously, there's another theme here is that, and by that he's obviously talking about organized religion and dogma,
Yeah.
and the us and them thing that comes from whether it's religion or a football team or whatever. It's we, we like to find differences with others, and I think that's what his message was. But he wrote
Yeah.
2001 with Stanley Kubrick. He wrote the novel afterwards, and I read all of, and I proceeded to read all of his stuff, and it's things like Carl Sagan in particular was another influence on me. He
Yeah.
wrote a fantastic, which was made into a film called Contact,
Hmm.
which again, if you read the film is quite good. The film's good, but it's nowhere near as the book. The book is genius. The book is a
Yeah.
profound genius. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And,
yeah, I recommend anyone who wants to read Contact by Carl Sagan. I'd go ahead and obviously the Cosmos TV series had a big effect on me in the early days as well because that's speculated about things like life forms on other planets and not necessarily in the guise that we would look at it, flesh and blood and stuff. There was also this, I vividly remember this on gaseous planets, how he speculated that there were ecosystems of gas beings that
mm,
basically herd animals, and it was kind of pretty much the same as it is on the savannah in Africa. There were hunter clouds and there were prey clouds and there were shooter clouds and all these kind of. So I just love the idea of the speculation of thinking outside the box with
yeah.
anything. So kind of, I've always had an open mind with stuff. Always tried to have an open mind.
Yeah. I think that's important when there's this saying, what is it? Set aside everything we think we know, and
Yes.
to be able to take in new ideas. I think kids kind of do that naturally. In a sense, they look at the
Mm,
world with a sense of wonder and curiosity,
mm,
and we're kind of, at least to the way that in my opinion, we're kind of taught to
mm.
suppress that and to
Yes.
conform to a certain way of thinking. And you had mentioned the us and them sort of, when you were speaking about a religion, this us and them mentality, this sort of, which creates this polarization and division and things of this sort. And I bring that up because you brought up the feeling of not fitting in, not feeling
Mm,
like you
mm,
belonged. And
mm,
that's just a topic that's been coming up a lot for me recently. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about this desire um, to belong. If you could maybe, um,
mm,
and the reason I think I bring this up is because I see it in myself, and
mm,
part of I relate to that feeling of not belonging, and I wonder, as we're on our journey,
mm,
if that is an essential need that needs to be fulfilled before moving forward.
mm,
And I see there's a lot of, in the recovery world. I think a lot of people that suffer from things like addiction or things of this nature. I hear a lot of this idea of not belonging, and so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
mm. Well, it's interesting because where I'm at the moment, I think, and even by hearing myself talk about that story about my father in the cemetery, is like I've kind of not wanted to belong in a very strange way. I've not wanted, even though I was at pains that I didn't belong. I didn't want to belong because I didn't want to be in the mundane. I've always been looking for something else beside, going to school, going to work, getting in your car, going to the job, being bored and working at jobs that we hate and things like that have always been a total anathema to me. And so while I've always kind of I've looked at and sort of enjoyed that I've been able to be open-minded and think about, speculate on the reality, the true reality, and I still speculate to this day. I would rather be speculating about that because there's something in my head that's always looked for that. And I think, like you said, really rightly, is I think whatever's going on in this kind of egoic reality that we live in, is that we tell the young beings, the young lights, and the young spirits in this world that no, don't look that way. Don't look at that because you need to get a job and you need to do that and fulfill your function because you've got to get a pension and you've got to make sure you retire and you live out your existence and do that stuff. And for me, I've thought, you know what, I'd rather just go for broke, and that's rightly or wrongly, and that's maybe reckless, but I'd rather live like that than do the boring thing. And it's just, I don't know, maybe I've got attention deficit disorder. I don't know, but I've never been. I hate the thought of a boring life. It's always been a thing. And I guess that you've got to be careful what you wish for, because I haven't had a boring life. And by boring, I don't mean excitement and water skiing and skydiving. I mean, there's been a lot of pain. There's been a lot of psychic terror. There's been a lot of real trauma, as well as some really good bits, and well as some fantastic loves and lots of passions and interest. And I've accomplished a fair bit. But like I said, so trying to belong at the same time where I've sort of felt I don't want to be part of that, I've had to pay the price of not being part of that. And I'm just talking about shit, basically, excuse my language, but just I find it really hard to go into a social situation in particular and talk about the weather or talk about the stock market or talk about clothing or, well, unless it's rugby or cricket or sport or or nature or reality or psychic phenomena or UFOs or ghosts or spiritual matters or anything like that, then it's not really floated my boat. And selfish as it is, but I've learned along the way to adapt to those situations, and I can operate in that. And maybe it's been said that maybe I'm on the spectrum somewhere, and that may be true as well. But I guess. There's a friend of mine in Ireland who's an atheist, a hardcore atheist, and he's become a really good friend of mine. And he always says, just be true to yourself. And that for me is true. I get bored with the mundane and the humdrum. I like to be around people and listen to people who talk honestly and openly about what's going on. So yeah.
There's you when you said there is this desire to belong, but then this feeling that you didn't belong, but this desire not to belong in a sense. I really got that. There's like this paradox to that, and it's almost like, well, where do I fit into this whole thing? And it's an interesting.
And that's a classic addiction stuff, is that as well, because and it comes, a lot of it sometimes that's interpreted as being self-esteem, and again, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but oftentimes that thing when if you're an addict, oftentimes you look down your nose at people and you think you're better than people, and then the next second you feel like you're some sort of a piece of scum on the gutter of the world. That's that dichotomy, like you say, that paradox between, and that's classic addiction thing. But again, the jury's still out on that for me. I remain open-minded, but it's interesting to speculate.
Well, let me ask you this: this thought just came to me. Do you think part of it could be that this feeling of not belonging, and also this desire to belong, at some deeper level is this, I don't think memory is the right word, but this part that knows itself as, and we'll maybe get into a little bit more into this more spiritual stuff, but this part that knows itself as, and words don't do justice, but as, let's say, pure awareness, or the ultimate, or but then being confined in a sense to a human body and this dense way of being, this having this human experience. So do you think that may be part of, could we ever really feel completely that we belong until we're, while there's identity to some sort, with the body mind phenomenon?
That's a really good question. I strongly believe in that. I was formed, my character and my personality, and the I, if you will, the I is formed in an early age. Up until about the age of 18 months or 2 years, that we don't really see ourselves as a thing, or as a person, or as a concept of a person. And it's only then when you start realizing that you believe that you're separate to what's going on, that you start, you start putting words and stuff, and you start symbolizing, when you're a kid, you'll see something flying in the air with feathers and a pointy thing on its face, and it flies gracefully, and you just think that's amazing, it's wonderful. And then all of a sudden, your mum says, "Oh, that's a bird." So the magic and the mystery of that's always gone, and it's forever a bird. And it's just little things like that sort of start creating the personality. And and it is like, literally, your personality for me is like a bird's nest. It's again, there's a guy called Ade Richardson, who I'm sure you're familiar with, who talks about stuff like that as well. And I love his analogy of the bird's nest as the ego, or however you want to say, or the little self, or the parasite, or whatever, is a construct of all that experience of other people's opinions and other people's thoughts, and your father's beliefs and your mother's opinions, and that somebody on television, in a book. And every one of these is a little twig that builds up a bird's nest in terms of your concept of you and how you see the world. And that's, you create a filter, and through things like words and opinions, and we start judging people, and us and them comes in, and we become separate. And that's and so since that age, I keep putting sticks on, but then I'd keep trying to take the sticks off, the twigs off. So my bird's nest keeps going up and down, and I guess, and that whole thing, like you spoke about, I was thinking about that before, is that when you talk about not feeling part of it, but not wanting to be part of it, one feeds off the other. When somebody doesn't let you into the cool gang, you get angry, and that anger fuels that sort of, maybe that isolation makes you speculate on stuff, and then that feeds that thing of not being part of it again. So it's sort of, like those stars, those, I think they're twin dwarfs that feed off each other at the end of it, out in the cosmos. It feeds off each other, and they burn off, and that's how I feel. There's a duality. There's certainly a duality of life in everything, in every sense. And that's Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It's I like the that analogy of the bird nest, and that you're kind of taking things off, but then put in things, and I wonder how, what comes up for me is, I see this in myself. Sometimes I will, and going back to this conditioning that we take on growing up, so we construct this sense of reality that is now the filter that I look at life through. And maybe part of that's influenced by parents, society, my particular situation. And then as you begin to come out of that, and that's a dismantle, like you learn, oh, Santa Claus is not real. Sorry, shocker.
Which is a
Anybody
shame.
out
Yeah.
there? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah. So then you kind of you little by, and I think this is part of really more so with the spirit people who are seeking this spiritual, on this spiritual path and seeking truth. And so that conceptual framework begins to dismantle, and the taking the bird nests apart. But then what I find happens, and I think maybe other people share this as well, is there's this fear of uncertainty, now fear of the unknown. So it's kind of, well, if I don't have that, and there's a program that says, well, then I'll be the empty hole in the donut. Like what am I going to be without these tools that form this reality? So then we kind of create another reality, which may feel a little bit more upgraded, but it's still a construction. If that makes sense.
Seeking becomes a
Yeah,
part of that. Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah,
and it's the policeman and the thief a lot of time, as Romana talks about it, or
yeah.
And always there's a great called, I don't know if anyone's heard of Paul Hederman. If you've been to Paul Hederman, and he talks about it, and he's actually become a friend of mine, which I'm really happy about. But he talks about that thing. It's like Dracula leading the hunt for the vampires. You know what I mean? He's asked to go, and I love that analogy because it's true. It's let's be a seeker. The ego says let's be a seeker, and we'll seek together. And oh look, there's another clue, and we'll do it together. And it's so cunning, baffling, and powerful. Is that attack? That sort of quest. And I think, and I've kind of come to the point now where I've stopped seeking because I can't see the point. I'm still interested in things like that, and I'm still interested in my sobriety and making connection with other people in addiction or everyone in 12 step programs. But all I can safely say right now is that I'm aware that I'm alive, that I'm aware, and that's pretty good. And once I touch base with that, that's pretty good. Do you know what I mean? It's not. I haven't even come full circle because there was nowhere to start because I would just sort of suddenly, it's like I materialized in this world at the age of 5 or 6, which are my earliest memories. And and then the pain set in with parents' divorces and things. And then so I've spent the time since then wondering why that pain's happened and trying to disseminate it and work it out, and thankfully I became an addict and I became an alcoholic because that was the thing that really was a fast track to dissembling the ego, because it quickly builds back up. But when I had a rock bottom, and I had lots of rock bottoms before I got sober, the bird's nest was sort of swept aside because the twigs and the way it was compiled was awry. It toppled because it was top heavy, full of its own self-worth, and it was made, and it was built on a foundation of low self-esteem and a false construct. The platform of what it was wrong, so it was inevitably going to topple. Some people's don't topple for ages, and some people topple sooner or later. Particularly if you're plagued with this thing, and a lot of it's to do with childhood trauma, and oftentimes it's with people who were born that way.
Yeah.
But it topples sooner or later. It topples, and some people stay sober, some people don't. Some people don't even know that they, whatever the issue is. But mine toppled, and I was lucky because it toppled just enough for me to get a glimpse, and that sobriety has been part of my spiritual journey. And like I say, and I was going to talk about that, but it was, again, I've been on this spiritual journey. Often I've been aware that I was on a spiritual journey, and sometimes I wasn't because I was caught up in the drama of life, in the maya of life, if you will, and I was caught up in that. And,
so what led to the the drinking or drugging and things of that nature? What was it? Just like a curiosity at the time that developed into a
No,
coping?
I come from, well, I do need to make mention just on that. Again, part of the journey for me, the spiritual journey, there was a film I saw called The Razor's Edge, which starred Bill Murray, and it was made in the 80s.
Mm,
And that had a profound effect on me. And anyone who wants to see, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a great film, but the story was very compelling for me because I was a seeker.
yeah.
And it's basically about a guy, it's based on the book by Somerset Maugham, which was based on, I think, apparently a mishmash of various experiences of people that he'd met. And he'd been to India and he met Ramana, did Somerset Maugham. And he wrote a book about a guy's spiritual journey from World War One, where he was an ambulance driver in World War One before America sort of got involved, and he goes on a quest for the meaning of life and ends up in Tibet and becomes enlightened and works in Paris, and he has all these dramas. And I was totally caught up in the romance of that, and it sort of pushed a lot of buttons for me. The romance and the spiritual journey was like perfect for a seeker. That's perfect. And I decided I wanted to do that. I wanted to be a seeker. I wanted to find out the meaning of life.
Mm,
And but at that same time, I was cursed with a family who had the alcoholic gene, if you will. If some people say it's a gene, I don't know. But I had that in my mother, like I say, was a chronic alcoholic, and her side of the family were all alcoholic. They're alive now, but they are deeply, and a lot of that might be from trauma because they emigrated from Holland at the end of the Second World War, where they were in occupied Holland, Amsterdam. They were in the Dutch underground, and I think they saw a lot of stuff, and I think that had an effect on that family as well.
sure.
So,
Yeah.
and I was brought up in an alcoholic household. There's no doubt about it. My parents divorced, and my mother had had a couple of boyfriends who were alcoholic as well. And just when you're brought up in that environment, and that's for my story was I was brought up in that environment. I was brought up with a lot of violence. There was a lot of mental bullying. There was a lot of intellectual bullying, and there was other kinds of trauma and abuse for me personally. And it's like in Star Wars, that path will forever, the dark side will forever dominate your path. And I
Yeah.
felt that I was, looking back, I was pretty much destined to do that, is to be a drinker. And as I grew up, as I said, I had that sense of not belonging and having that kind of awareness thing, and the way to cope with the pain of not belonging and the pain of a lot of that abuse is to drink. And
Yeah.
you see adults who drink, you see adults who drug, and you think, you know what, that's an excuse to not be me. I'll
Mm,
do it, and it's safe to be that. And you just grow up with this, chronic low self-esteem. Oftentimes you're brought up to feel that you're not worthy, and getting drunk seems like the logical, subconsciously, consciously and subconsciously, that seems to be the way that you're going to do it. And I did it, and I just went for it. And the drinking and the drugging for me was, I assumed that character. My bird's nest assumed the character of big drinker and
mm,
druggy and pot smoker, and so and speed addict and coke addict and heroin guy, and there was all that stuff. And I just didn't want to be me. I wanted to see the movie. I didn't want to go to the cinema to see a film. I wanted to live in a film, and I wanted to have experience of alternative realities. And
yeah.
unfortunately, I found that a poor substitute with drink and drugs. That's true, and I
Yeah.
did. But it took its toll. It took its toll on my relationships. It took its toll on me. And I did some, terribly stupid things or ignorant things when I was drinking and drugging. And I just, I ruined several relationships and lost jobs and all those things as a result of that. It's just, people, there's, the schools are out. People, the people in recovery will know what I mean. People who aren't in recovery seem to think that you've got no, what's it called, discipline or will,
Yeah.
strong, you've got you're weak, and they don't really, it's that empathy thing,
Hmm.
and not kind of the ability to empathize with people who might have come from those issues or that background. And that's not to say everyone who's an alcoholic or addict comes from those backgrounds, because that's not, it's my experience. I know people who come from the Brady Bunch who are
Yeah.
drinkers and druggers. So yeah.
It's interesting. You've probably heard of Dr. Gabor Mate.
Yes. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
great. Yeah.
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 He does a lot of work with around addiction and trauma.
Yeah.
And his belief is not everyone that has trauma becomes addicted in some ways. Although
Hmm.
he tends to think we're all pretty much society as a whole is addicted in some
Sure.
sort of way. But he says he believes everyone that has a addiction, alcoholics and addicts, have some, you can find, even if their external life look like the perfect life, if you trace it back to their childhood or somewhere, or maybe it's it's an ancestry thing as well, that
Yeah.
you can find some sort of trauma there, that hasn't been met, that hasn't been
Absolutely.
recognized, and
Absolutely.
yeah, so that made a lot of sense to me. And
Mm.
so this how did that? I mean, would you be the person you are now if you had it? I mean, isn't it a sort of? Do you think it's a blessing in disguise? Even though obviously you went through a lot of pain and suffering with the
Yeah.
addiction, but how has it influenced your spiritual journey and who you are today?
Well, like I say, it's that thing, everyone gets what they want. In the end, if you want to go on be a spiritual seeker, you become it. That's whether you want to, whether you consciously want to or not. That's we're all spiritual seekers. And I want to say just on that is that I certainly believe that everyone on earth is an addict of some kind. We all suck on the teat of something, to feed off something. But it's just some of us play heavy metal, thrash metal, and some of us play acoustic guitar. It depends on the level of addiction, and how heavy that's going to be.
Yeah.
But for me, my journey into the 12-step recovery is intrinsic in my spiritual path. I mean, I wouldn't be the person I was because that's who I am. And I always think that the fellowship that I'm in is the closest that it'll be to David Anonymous. That's as close as it's going to get because there's no fellowship for me, but I find I have most in common with Alcoholics Anonymous. That's of all the fellowship. I feel that that's the one I've got most in common with because I qualify for all of them. I qualify for Narcotics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Relationships, and Coda, adult children of alcoholics. I qualify. There's although I didn't gamble, I wasn't a gambler. But there's so many 12-step fellowships I qualify for. But AA is the closest that I've got to the one that's set up especially for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's part of my journey. It's just AA 12-step recovery is part of. It's not the whole of my recovery, and it's not the whole of my spiritual search, but it certainly fast-tracked me into an awareness or a better path and a better way of living, so that I could perhaps fulfill that search that I was on, and it certainly made it possible. It made me feel that there's a reality to the world because I think, like you said, originally said, and I think it's really important you were saying that about, they beat it out of children. We beat it out of our children that there's magic in the world. That's like the bird thing I was talking about, the feathered animal, that we
Hmm.
create a bird. We
Yeah.
lose the romance and we lose the spirituality. We lose the wonder, the wonder. We lose that wonder of the magic and that inspiration or that aspiration. When you get passionate about something, you get inspiration. And we lose that inspiration as we get older because we're told to go and get a job and that you've got to be responsible. It's like, what's the Logical song? Was it by that band, the American band? It was really great. Have you heard the Logical song? Do you know that? It's an old song,
No,
but
I
it's
don't.
great.
I don't think I have.
Supertramp, was it? I think it was Supertramp. And it's great. And it's, when I was young, I thought that life was so wonderful and magical, and they took me away and taught me how to be logical. And that's
Mm.
kind of, we lose that, and that's that egoic thing, whether it's a collective consciousness like Young talks, but we're sort of we don't want to look at spiritual matters. We don't want to look at maybe to question the very foundations of whatever world we live in. We're taught not to do that. And I think that oftentimes that's a purposeful thing. Done on purpose by a collective consciousness, which is of fear. You know, the fear thing. We don't want to go down there because you can't have faith, because that means having faith in a higher power or something that's not me. You know what I mean? There's something that's not that takes away control. And I think, you know, that's where I'm at the moment. Is I've kind of decided that I want to be that child again. And I've you know, to look at life with magic and wonder and be inspired.
You know, I think what the talking about films, you mentioned a lot of films and filmmakers, but when you're talking about this part of the logic and a portion of the collective kind of pushing us to sort of fall into line. Those aren't the words that you use, but to not feed our curiosity and wonder, but to rely on logic, and not just logic, but logic as it was passed down to us. And the filmmaker that came to mind is Charlie Chaplin. It's like a lot of his films is the what is it called? He captures a lot of that, like him being a I forget the name of the film. Now I'm just drawing a blank.
Great
but anyway,
Dictator.
Yeah, films like that. You know, the contrast. That's the word of him in the middle of this order. You know, this he kind of exactly. So he kind of represents this innocence and this childlike quality in the middle of this very structured, ordered reality that feels very dense, very serious, and he's like this great contrast who's kind of going against that and trying to make his way in this world. And that's you know, so when you talked about that, you know, him as a filmmaker came to mind, because there's and to be able to bring humor to that as well is, and the playfulness. I think that's the thing that we're missing. And the other thing that came to me when you were talking about the logic and how we've been conditioned is there's a neuroscientist, Bu Lotto. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's great. But he one of the things he says is that the human brain, and I think this is part of the culprit and why we get kind of fixated in being relying on this logic and doing things in these conditioned sort of ways is part of, you know, the brain is developed to seek certainty as a way to survive, you know. So somewhere in the development, the brain wants to know, you know, what's next, and it doesn't want to know necessarily what the ultimate reality is. The brain just wants to know enough so that it can get from point A to point B. And the problem with that is it keeps us confined to a very limited perspective, you know, a very narrow vision of the world. So what he was saying is that, you know, because there's this big feeling and fear of this uncertainty, you know, that's biological in a sense as well. The gift that we've been given is playfulness. So that's how we can explore uncertainty. We can step out into uncertainty like a child. You know, children are playful. And one of the things he was saying is, rather than going from, because we think in this sort of linear way of thinking, rather than going from point A to point B, which, you know, especially for addicts, alcoholics, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So going for that knee jerk, going from point A for point B, what he was saying is don't go to point A, So, I mean, for us, for the recovering alcoholic or addict, maybe it's don't go to A is don't pick up that drink. And then you open up this world of possibilities. Well, then there's this big unknown, where the program may say you feel like the empty hole, in the donut. Or another analogy is like letting go of you're hanging on a cliff and you let go, but you don't know what's underneath. Will there be a net to catch you? So my question is, how do you deal with this this uncertainty? Because it sounds like, when you say you had stopped seeking, and what you know now is this, that you are, that this I, which is profound, which is like, it's not a small thing, as you know. Yeah. I mean, it's not just, it's a little, I is a little letter, but that's not what you mean. It's a huge doorway, So I just wonder if you could maybe riff on that.
Well, that's wonderful, because this is where we're into the guts of it now, and that's fantastic. I mean, you made me think about when you mentioned neuroscience as well. I don't know if anyone's listening. I would highly recommend they Google BBC documentary "Free Will and Neuroscience," and it's a documentary that was run on the BBC about 8-9 years ago, and I don't think it's available anymore. And I'm not sure whether that's on purpose or not, because it was a very, very good, and it's available. You can watch. I think it's on Vimeo, and this experiment was, and they examined this experiment that was done in Germany, and it's all there on record, so you can go and examine it. But there was a test done in one of those tubes that you get put in when when you go in for medical procedures. Those big tubes that they scan you with.
Oh, was it the CAT scan?
Or something like that. But there's a test that was done, and basically, so the subject goes inside, and there's a little screen there, and they have to answer yes or no to a series of 50 questions. And you go yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and they're scanning your brain. And you pulled out of this MRI, exactly, right? And you pulled out of this tube, and it turns out the person watching, this is true, the person observing the test knew what your answers were going to be 7 seconds before you said them. Right? So,
wow.
For me, there's no free will. So this thing that I call David, or this I, or this thing that we call Ade, is only a jockey without the reins. We really, and that's the great anger, and that's where the rage, I think, comes from. This thing that you said, because it's furious that it's not in charge. We ain't in charge, and that's a legitimate scientific experiment. They've shown it. It's been done thousands of times. It's true. Is that every time we think we're in charge, but in the end, all we are is a jockey that hasn't got its hands on the reins of this horse. It's all there. We're a David Attenborough narrator. We're the narrator who's commenting along the way, but in the end, it's none of our business what God wants us to do, as far as I'm concerned, or whatever it is, whatever the cosmic clown is, or whatever you want to call it. We're just along for the ride, and that's a comfort. That can be horrifying to some people, or a comfort, because in the end, you know that you're going to be okay. And that part of that process of letting go, for me, of letting go of that, was a big realization. You know what I mean? Because it's none of my business what God wants me to do, or whatever it is wants me to do, as far as I'm concerned. I just, so I might as well just sit back and enjoy the ride, and that's, or not enjoy the ride, but just accept what's going on. Just accept it and do my best. And I think, like you said about the humor thing, is really important, is true, but also I think of being service to other human beings is probably a safer way of doing it. Humor and service is very important. So being of service, I think that for me is kind of the meaning of everything, is helping people when they're upset or they're hurt, or being there for other people. Because I've learned the hard way with that is that that's probably the true nature of love is, or true nature of ourselves is to love, and to be there for other people or be there for other things, whether it's animals or societies or whatever, is to be of service and help and do things for other people. And I think that's the currency that our society should be based on. And again, that's not acceptance, but I think when any currency that's other than love is going to be have a problem. And for society as a whole, the currency is money and oil and greed, and that creates greed. But when you're in, say for instance, in a lot of the 12-step fellowships, the currency is love and service. And I think that the world as a whole could probably learn from that. And that's again one of the great paradoxes and issues, is that you have to be a screwed up, crazy alcoholic addict to actually get to that point to do it. So, and I think we are probably we're rushing towards that kind of nexus. We're rushing towards that vanishing point to the lip of the black hole. We're actually rushing to that, where a lot of people are getting into 12-step fellowships. A lot of people are, and it doesn't necessarily have to be 12-step fellowships. It can be anything, but is being of service and being of love and going out of your way to actually helping other people. For me, I do a lot of service in the fellowship. I do a lot of service in the fellowship, and I found that oftentimes when somebody asks for help, my head, the little commentary, the little David Attenborough narrator, will say, this person's an idiot, or this person doesn't deserve it, or this person, why can't they do it for themselves? And I know now that little voice is not me.
Yeah.
So I'll go and do the service anyway, because I know instinctively that I've got to be of service, because I'm doing whatever will it is, whatever. And I hate using that word God, but I'm doing the service of love. And I found that my life has got so much better when I'm of service to other people and trying to help other people, and going, just being brave, of going out of your way to help others. And that's where we talk about that inspiration, that childlike quality, seeing that feathered animal flying in the sky, of wonder and stuff. And that's that there's a thing in the big book about the age of miracles is upon us, and that's certainly true. I think the age of miracles is still with us, but those miracles are the fact that when you go out of your way to help people. And we hear stories about this all the time, but I think, and for me, that's where the great spirituality lies, is knowing that I'm alive, and whether or not that awareness is a trick of evolution, I don't know. I can't speculate, because the HAL 9000 brain, the very limited computer inside this skull that was created to find water holes and know when to farm and where to put the sheep and what partner I want, that thing is trying to operate way above its pay grade. So I can't afford to speculate on whether things are right or wrong. And it's certainly true that consciousness and awareness could be an evolutionary trick. I think it could be. I don't know whether it is for sure, but it's certainly possible. But that's part of that open-mindedness we spoke about. For me, is being open-minded to the fact that it could be wrong. All these great sages like Ramana and the Buddha, Jesus and Krishna, they could be wrong. It could be a simple trick, but I'm not sure. So whether or not I'm an agnostic or an atheist or a seeker, all I know is that right now, David is alive and the I is present. And that's as good as it gets for me. And part of that function, what I've learned, that I does feel a sense of contentment and a sense of doing a higher purpose when I'm of service to other people. And that's where it is. And when I accepted that I had no free will, or that I need that voice to shut up, that little narrator to shut up, then I'm in a good place. But that's a daily thing for me. I've got to do that every day. I have to be aware of that every day, because my ego mushrooms. My ego is it springs up all over. It's like the weeds in the garden. Those virulent weeds that pop up. If anyone's a gardener and you clean your garden out, and all your roses or your whatever your flowers are all nicely done one day, you wake up the next and there's all these weeds have popped up. And that's certainly for me. I've got to be continually trying to weed out all the stuff in that garden every day. And I can't rest on my laurels. So am I being of service to other people is important for me.
I agree. And
Mm,
one thing that came up for me when you were talking about whether this whether consciousness is just sort of um, biological sort of happening in the
mm,
brain,
mm.
and we don't know,
No.
But when you mentioned that, it brought up a little bit of fear within me, like, oh no, that's because I, you know, it triggered this desire to know, which
Mm,
is
mm.
connected to that one in safety. But then when you talked about, well, what I really know is that there's this I,
Mm,
and for me, this is where I come back to, this sense of I, and it
mm,
does feel like this place of refuge in a way. I think,
mm.
the feeling that comes up for me, or the experience, is when when I'm thinking about, well, is this is this consciousness biological or not? Or, that question
Mm.
is sort of placed somewhere out there, because it's an unknown, and it,
Yes.
and it and it comes with it this that sort of seek-in mentality as well, or it feeds the mind. The mind wants to know, and it has attached to it also this sort of linear way of thinking, and it
Mm.
brings into it this time and space, so it's in the
Yes.
realm of time. Whereas
Mm,
when you mention the I and just
mm,
coming into this place, it's
mm,
like outside of all of those questions, really, because it's
mm,
the
mm,
experience of it,
mm,
it's here now. And I
mm.
think the all of those other things, and perhaps Ramana Maharshi would have said, something similar, because it is in his teachings. A lot of this stuff is just created by the mind. He would say
Yeah.
that even the energetic experience, even the most subtle experiences, spiritual experiences that we have, is this
Mm,
creation of the mind. So he does kind of whittle, you know, everything back, peels the onion back
mm.
to this sense of
Yeah.
I, which is quite, uh, it's no small thing, the
Yeah.
being with the body, and being with this reality, whatever you want to call it. And does it feel like, for me, it feels miraculous.
Mm,
It's such
mm,
a miracle to have this conversation with you, to be here
mm,
in this
mm,
body. And the reason this is coming up is because you mentioned the importance of love and
mm,
service, and
mm.
part of the title of this podcast is a spiritual journey, going from I to we, you know,
Yes.
community
Hmm.
and
Hmm. Yes.
service.
Yeah.
And so what does love mean to you? I know it's a big word, but can you talk a little
Mm.
bit about love? And
I
then
certainly
perhaps
can.
perhaps after you answer this question, I just want to remind our viewers, if you have any questions for David, please send them in the comment section of the Facebook, under the Facebook video, and I'll try to get them to him.
Sure. Yeah. Just listening to you talk is actually sparking off loads. Love that's a really good question. Um, and it happened again. I don't learn through like for me, learning is because I bump into barbed wire. I don't learn because I'm really wise. I learn from my mistakes. That's how I've learned. That's how I've learned all my life. And usually it's it has to be something extreme. And I had an issue 3 years ago. I made a film, and it did quite well on the festival circuit and stuff, and won a few awards and all that stuff. But it led to not stuff that's personal stuff, but it led to a bit of a trauma for me, of my own doing, because I thought that I was, I lost a lot of humility, which was an egoic, trick that I did on myself. So whatever. And I know that sounds enigmatic, but that's beside the point. So I've got a friend in Spain, and I offered to dog sit for her, and she's got a beautiful Pimenco dog, the Spanish dog. They're beautiful. I love animals. I love dogs. And so I did dog sitting for a few weeks for her. And she lives in Andalusia, in the mountains of Andalusia. And it's a beautiful place. But right opposite where she lives, there's this crypt on the top of this mountain. So I used to take the dog up to this crypt. And I mean, it's a 2-hour hike to the top of this mountain. And I'd been reading a lot of Sufi literature. And Sufis are really interesting for me. I find particularly there's a lady called Irina Tweedy. And again, there's another one for you to have a look up, because anyone wants to read Irina Tweedy's Daughter of Fire, or the longer version, I think it's called Chasm of Fire. And she was a Russian lady who was married to an English soldier, I think, or an English guy in the 20th century. And in 1960, he died, and she went to India on a spiritual search. And through a series of events, she studied under a Sufi master in India. And the book is fantastic, because it talks about her journey from being, basically a real grumpy, judgmental battle axe to becoming a spiritual, loving being. And the Sufis don't really believe in, from what I can gather, enlightenment's not a thing for them. It's about love. And what I found was that and from reading that book and talking to people like that, is I learned that I love very sparingly in my life. Most of us, I think that, and again, that's my take on it, is that we offer love in a very thin band, and very sporadically, and very rarely. So we love our children, we spare our love for our children, we spare our love for parents, we spare our love for animals, and maybe sporting teams and countries, right? And it's like we give it very sparingly. So it's a very thin band that we do, like once or twice a day. We give that unconditional love. It's like a shot from the chest, like that inspiration and that aspiration, that sense of wonder, perhaps. But we give it. It's the same thing for me, but it's like we'll just do a little it'll be a little pebble that we throw out of love, and then we go, oh yeah, and the rest of it we spend hating, or being judgmental, or getting on with jobs, or being mesmerized by the all important paying the mortgage and making sure that you retire nicely and you get to go on your end of life cruise on in the Riviera somewhere or something. Whatever. That's judgmental,
Yeah.
but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And what the Sufis talk about is don't be, for me, what I got from it is don't be sparing with it. Give it out. So, and it's only a matter of mind, is to go boom, give it out. So I used to go to this mountain, on the top of this mountain, and look down on all these mountains, and I sort of felt this whole spiritual thing going on with me, which is, I was relying on outside things to make me feel this way, which I don't do now. And I just gave it out. I just all of a sudden, I let the love out. I let it out. I allowed myself to love unconditionally, like a lighthouse, and just let it out. And I did. And I gave it out, and it was wonderful. And it's quite scary to do it, because, we all got people that we don't like. We've all got governments that we don't like, leaders that we don't like, sporting teams we don't like. There's all things that we don't like. We put conditions on that love. I'll only love if that person's nicer to me, or that person dies, or that person does this. It's, but to wash away all that and just go, right, bollocks to that. I'm just going to love. And I did it. And it was such a liberating thing. It was amazing, is to just give it out. And for me, that was a big spiritual awakening. And it was only the beginning of just another step on that video game of life, is to actually find that and be able to do that. And I gave it out, and it was amazing. And all sorts of miraculous things have happened since then for this construct. There's a lot of stuff that's happened. I've been able to be of service and to give that love out, and it's been profound. It has been profound. And oftentimes the narrator goes, whoa, 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 I'm a little bit, this is a bit too much, and that person's pissing me off, and that doing it. And I just have to remember that, to put the sail up on the boat and take your hand off the rudder. I've got to remember that that's got to be my default setting and to do it. And oftentimes it's things that we don't like. It's oftentimes where we do things. When you do that, when you lead that kind of spiritual life, inverted commas spiritual, because I don't really know what that means, but when we do that and we just give it over and let go, as David Hawkins calls it, is letting go. When we let go, it's liberating, but it can be frightening. So that's what love means. Love means to me is inspiration, aspiration, and giving forth unconditionally. And I try to do that. It's funny that fire still burns on me, and I don't have to try now. I still am judgmental of people, and people piss me off. But I know that at the back of it all, that there's a deep level of forgiveness of myself. I can forgive myself for thinking like that as well. So it's profound. It's a profound thing. It's a
Yeah,
profound thing. When you do that, it's when you put that sail up and let the wind of whatever blow on it and take you wherever it's got to go. It's gentle and loving.
yeah. And the word that, when you talk about how it could feel sometimes difficult when we are thinking in this sort of tribalistic way, we save our love for these group of people. For if I'm a Democrat, I'll share it with the Democrats, or this or that. And it brings up the thing in program, the saying, principles before personalities.
True.
And the other thing that came to mind is, I wonder, do you think your ability to sort of express this love to a broader range of people, and I'm guessing not just humans, but all things, and animals and nature, and it sounds like you were able to let love out in a very broad sense. Do you feel like part of what enabled you to do that is this deep sense or recognition that in everything there is a God or a higher power, and you recognize it in yourself, like this sense of I? Or was that not something that you conceptualized or were aware of that, or just curious about that?
And again, this is quite personal. I don't really talk about this stuff. There's a few people I've spoken about, but it's I have no concept of a God. I have no concept of that. I don't. And that's not Zen, and that's not non-duality, and that's not Buddhism or whatever. I don't know. And I don't necessarily give it to people. I don't give it. I don't think it's because those are concepts. People's personalities are basically mirror balls that are reflections of other people's opinions and reflections. So we all bounce off each other, and even the worst leader of ever that's existed, in the worst person ever, let's say Adolf Hitler, is only the reflection of opinions and like mirror. We mirror our parents, and we all that bird's nest stuff that we talk about in constructing is he's a construct of other things and other places, and this thing was malleated into things. So all those personalities, as you say, are just false constructs for me. They're false constructs. So when I give out that love, I'm just giving it out. I don't know who I'm giving it out to. I don't know. And again, when there's an agenda for me, when an agenda that I'm giving out love to somebody or something, then I think that's a dodgy path. That path is wrong. I think it's just about giving it out, because there's people even in the last 12 months when we've been during the lockdown and stuff that I've never met, and I've only met on Zoom, that I can't stand. But that's the narrator not standing people. But all I do know is that I just know that my primary purpose is to give out love, and that's by actions, whether that's by deeds, actions, thought, or emotion, or whatever. It's just to get out, and just is to wish well for people. The positive, give out a positive feeling for everyone. I guess I know that sounds pretty hippy dippy, but it's like, once you and I both know that we're all flawed, and there's I think there's probably been 4 enlightened beings in the history of the planet, I would think, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think, and for any of us to even dream of doing that, or people that say they are, I think is a mistake. I don't know. Even, talk about Jesus. Was Jesus enlightened? From what we know, I mean, all we've got is the books, and we've got a Bible that was filleted in the First Vatican Council, whenever that was, by the Emperor Constantine, and they changed a lot of the contents of the Bible, and we've got an idea of Jesus which is still pretty intact. And the idea of Jesus is that unconditional love, and of giving it out, and having dinner with the prostitutes and the lepers and stuff. It's that sort of thing, I think, is the example. Those little stories that are left with us, that are the important ones. Walking on water and turning 40 loaves up and stuff. You can look at all the symbolism and whatever, but for me, it's just, it's the people. Those are the sort of lessons, I think, for enlightened beings that are there. And I think that's,
yeah.
We just ride on the coattails of those and try to do that work, and those are the examples, I think, for me. And
Yeah. And it seems like, and going back to how we've constructed this sort of reality,
Yes.
in a way, and use it through the filters that were passed down.
Yeah.
And I would say constructing it through the filter of if you can call it a filter, but with the intention, I don't know if it's an intention or not, but with love, it just seems like we're creating a more beautiful reality in a sense. If we're going to do it anyway,
Yeah.
I think love and service is a more useful.
It's I mean, it's a lot easier to love than it is to hate. That's for sure. I think.
Yeah.
I think now it is, and I think that's probably the fulcrum has changed for me, because at one time it was very easy to hate and be judgmental and be nasty and to be vindictive and be vitriolic, and it's easy to do that.
Yeah.
But now it's a lot easier for me to love, because I know my default setting is that once I start thinking with hate, I'm thinking using my head.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using the computer, which is not built for any kind of positivity. The computer, for me, will always come up and always speculate towards the negative. For me, it will. If I let my brain go, it'll be always colored by emotion and past experience and memory. And once I do that, it goes back to daddy. It runs back to daddy. It runs back to that the future will be shit, and the past was really traumatic.
Yeah.
And it's colored by that. So, and memories, we talk about the now and stuff, but memory is a real curse in a lot of cases, because it has an evolutionary reason. We have memory to remember, where the water used to be, where we found a watering hole once upon a time, or where the mammoths used to graze, or where the religious icons used to be, or where it's, memory is an important thing. And to remember who, if we didn't have memory, then we'd all be wandering around bumping into each other and, getting married every day and forgetting things. But so the memory is important, but at the same time, it colors us, and it colors us either, usually, for me, it's a negative thing. So that's why I have to get out of the head. I can't live in the head. I need to live in the heart. And then, and that's that. And then it went from there, and that I always think it's like a pinball machine, like if you think about your head as a pinball machine. And for me, when I was drinking and drugging and living on extreme self-will, it's like the pinball, was the flippers were at the bottom flicking the ball, and the ball was bouncing off inside my head, and that whole random bing bing bong bong and bouncing and bouncing. And then I decided one day to let the flippers up and let the ball go down my gullet into my heart. And that was a day. That was a day. That was a good day. and it doesn't. And then oftentimes the ball comes back up, and you start playing pinball again. So it's just a matter of me letting the flippers go up and letting the ball come back down again.
Yeah, I
And just
like that
remember,
analogy.
yeah,
Yeah.
just remember, I'm not in charge, and I'm a jockey. I'm just the jockey without the reins. It's important.
Yeah. There's a picture. I think it's in I think it's on the cover of, at least I don't have the copy with me, but I think it's Krishna on a chariot with the reins and the horses. That I think the horses represent the senses, the five senses, and Krishna is, you could say, the Godhead. If you want to call him the Godhead, or awareness, consciousness, and the horse. I forget what the horse is. Anyway, it's an interesting analogy of what we've been talking about in a sense. So yeah.
It's a beautiful analogy, and that's certainly true. It's realizing that that's not us, and that for me, it's just.
Yeah. So where should we go now? Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get into?
Gosh, there was all sorts of things that were firing off when you were talking. I think, as I say, just to kind of summarize, is not to have a concept of anything is important for me, and just to have, to note that all bets are off, because I find that if I nail my colors to the mast, I mean, Moby Dick is a great story, and I'm sure, I'm not one of those who've read Moby Dick, but I love the story of Moby Dick, and there's bits of it that come to me, and there's a piece, and I remember as a child reading about that when Ahab nailed a coin to the mast to say the first person to see Moby Dick gets this coin, and they all went absolutely crazy. They were vying with each other to see the great white whale, to see the search, because he was driven by revenge and driven by hate to find the white whale, and that's what killed him. And oftentimes there were stories, I think, about Moby Dick would appear at different parts of the world, thousands of miles apart, but he would always show up, and Ahab would go madly chasing after him, and the seeking, was driven, and they were all on board with, like that tyrant was always, he was putting up a little bit of a carrot for the first person to see the white whale. And I think when I nail my colors to the mast, or I nail a coin to the mast, and I believe something, if I believe 100% that this is the way to do it, like Arthur C. Clarke said, that becomes a religion, or it weighs me down. It's like an anchor. It weighs me down. So I just try not to nail my colors to the mast on anything these days, because believe me, when I was drinking and drugging, and before I let the flippers up in the pinball machine, I thought I had truth by the tail, and I was very firm in my opinions about anything. And I think religion particularly seeking, I mean, it's so it make you would actually, that's the thing you were talking about. It's like, I mean, I've been in a lot of group, seeking spiritual groups, and it's like, God, and it's all of a sudden it's hilarious that when you get one or two people, whether they're addicts or not, whether they're just normal folk, when you get two people together and they start, in a society of some kind, they start creating echelons and class systems, and you become somebody who has the truth and somebody else doesn't. And it's and that's the beauty of Ramana. That's why I like Ramana. I like Nisargadatta as well, because for them it wasn't, they weren't telling anyone about believing anything that they say. They weren't ordering people, and there was never a religion, and it was never a cult, and it wasn't anything like that. It was just people venturing an opinion, of what they did, and people chose to listen to. So, and they didn't take money for anything, and they didn't accept, they lived in relative squalor, really. Do you know what I mean? A lot of, I guess, what we're used to. So I would just, it never ceases to amaze me that the humor that I get from watching human beings create class systems. It's like, the bonobos and the bonobo monkey chimpanzees in Africa. You watch you watch them, or any kind of ape society. That automatically they create a dominant and a passive, and they create a structure and an order in order to exist and to find some sort of sociological way of surviving. And I think that we're all trapped in that paradigm. We're trapped in that hierarchy.
Yeah.
And it happens, and that's what happens with Ramana stuff. People create these Ramana devotion things, and you'll find somebody's been studying it for 20 years and they know more than you do. And people follow and stuff, and it's just, and I think in the end it's just to accept that we know nothing. We know nothing. We know nothing, because there's not anything. For me, I'm not 100% guaranteed sure of anything at all. And I think that's, so I'm happy with where I am, and I'm happy with thinking that it might be an evolutionary trick. Consciousness may be a way of, like I say, there might be the spinal cords are plugged into your brain at the back. We're plugged into a main switch that turns on the brain, that lights up the electrodes, and consciousness is a trick to give us meaning and purpose. Because, if we didn't have a meaning and purpose, then I guess we'd all just sit around on sun lounges all day, drinking martinis and smoking cigarettes. I guess, I don't know. And playing Scrabble. There wouldn't be much to do. So having a purpose and having a thing is an evolution. Everything's evolutionary in this time, and like you said, that time and space thing, is tricky. Is tricky. So So that's probably what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and yet while the seek-in, I agree, and I would say there's still a lot of seek-in element with me. It hasn't stopped, and I don't know. I mean, it sounds like for you it was just a natural falling away. Like the letting go of this sort of. There's a guy in a friend in program who says, when I let go, I leave scratch marks. So we usually,
that's great. I love that.
We usually realize, at least in my case, that I've let go when, in hindsight, I recognize, that's not happening anymore. But then many times when I realize that I've let go, and I equate it with the peace that I'm experiencing at the moment, because there is this profound peace that comes with letting go, because I'm no longer grasping. The mind is no longer grasping at whatever it is it's thirsting for. And so with the letting go, this sort of just relaxing into the moment, and then the mind realizes, oh, I've let go. And at least for me, sometimes I notice the mind, okay, well, how did I do that? So how did I let go? And so then as soon as that thought comes up and that thought is believed, then I have to maintain, it creates this whole identity, of Ade that has let go. And now I have to maintain that in some way. And so it's like the hamster in the wheel, or the dog chasing its tail. And I'm just saying that because if anyone's listening and feeling like, you have this sort of, I guess what I'm saying is it sounds like for you, it's just a natural sort of, I don't know if we can just choose to let go of maybe we can just, okay, I'm not gonna, and that's the question of, to you. Can we just say, okay, I'm not gonna seek without becoming a not seeker, rather than it have just let go naturally,
I think, Eckhart Tolle, he talks about the power of now. And I think if you take that to its nth degree, living in the moment and living without memory and living without opinion and living without belief and living in that vacant space means letting go of seeking and just being, I guess. That's for me. And it's because it's so, the mind is so tricky and it's so cunning and it's so mesmerizing, because it mesmerizes us. It does, it mesmerizes. It's so you know, it's a genius at hypno. You know, it's like those stage hypnotisms, isn't it? Because it kind of hypnotizes you into believing that it's you, and it's constantly trying to bring you into the fold and bring you back and get you distracted, because the last thing it wants is to be non-existent, because it's terrified of things like the concept of Ramana. It's terrified of that. It's terrified of the feeling that, you know, the death of the ego. It's like, my God, what about that? I'm not going to exist. And in the end, you're not going to exist anyway, because we don't exist in the end, because we're all going to die, and we're all going to be stardust again one day. We came from stardust, and we'll probably end up being stardust in a trillion years in this particular dream. If this is a dream, if it is a dream, then, you know, it doesn't really matter, because in the end, you know, we live and we die, and you can't do anything about that. So you might as well stop worrying. You know, there's
Yeah.
that. I love that. You ever read Life, the Universe, and Everything? The book
No.
by Douglas Adams. It's a great British sci-fi thing, and it's well worth reading the book. Don't watch the film. Watch all the TV series is great. The BBC TV series is fantastic from the early '80s, very funny. But the book is genius, and it just says basically, you know, if all else fails, don't panic, because it's out of your hands. And I
Yeah.
think that, you know, we're all going to die, so you've got nothing. You've got bugger all that's going to stop that. You know, it's all these, you know, these great stories we read about, you know, people trying to maintain their health and their beauty and that immortality thing. And,
Mm.
you know, we ain't immortal. We're all going to die, and we're all going to slip into the big deep sleep. And it's just, you know, just enjoy the ride while we're here. That's for me. And we've got nothing to, like I said, what's the point in speculating? Because it's none of our business. It's none of our business. It's
Yeah.
none of our business what happens, because you're going to die. So you might as well just get on and enjoy it, because if this is the only life we've got, then bloody hell, make up for it. That's how I see it. And that's
Yeah.
why I've tried to do as much as I can, you know, because, you know,
Yeah. So I think that's probably, we're at the hour and a half mark, and
great.
let's see, we covered a lot of stuff, and
Yeah.
you know, yeah, and that idea of we're all gonna die is something that probably since our early age I
Mm.
recognize, and that kind of, you know, it's the great equalizer, you know,
Mm. Yeah.
in a way. So um, let's see. So, you know, just a few things before we wrap up.
Sure.
You know, what are you doing now? And is, you know, is there any work or things that you're doing that you want people to be aware of, and how can they connect with that?
Okay. So, yeah, that's really good of you. So, I run a podcast. I do a podcast every Friday, which is on at 3 p.m. Eastern, midday Pacific, um, 2 p.m. Central, um, 8 p.m. UK, and 7 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time.
Mm.
And that's called Here's Tom with the Weather. And that's a podcast that I run where we interview people. It's primarily 12-step based, but it's an investigation of different higher powers. So we've had everything from, you know, atheists, agnostics, non-duality. We've had Ramana. We had, like I said, we had Rupert Spira on. We've had David Godman on. We've had devil worshippers. We've had Satanists. We've had Zen Buddhists. We've had, you know, it's just the list goes on. We've had, you know, extensive, and we asked them about their belief, and that's basically, we set that up to encourage people to be a little bit more open-minded about other people's beliefs, because I
Yeah.
think, again, it comes back to that whole thing is, you know, that us and them thing is.
Mm.
And you know what one of the most amazing things about that podcast is, and you, if you listen to it, it's on YouTube. Here's Tom with the Weather. Go on YouTube, Spotify, um, or iTunes. It's on all of the podcast sort of things as well as on YouTube. And one thing that it's, you know, it's so true, is that we're all the same. We all believe in the same thing. It's bizarre. You know, we had a guy on Israel C on Friday who's in recovery. He's 40 years sober, clean and sober, and he converted to Judaism.
Mm.
Okay, and we went through it. Now, a lot of us have a token sort of maybe understanding, unless you're like a professor of religion, you don't really understand that. You know something about the Jews and stuff. But in the end, talking to this guy, you realize that he had the same belief as the guy who was talking about Buddhism and Zen,
Mm.
or probably the same thing that Ramana had as well, because he said we are all one.
Yeah.
All right. So in the end, that's essentially what we're talking about. It's just different ways of getting there. And his particular one, which was really lovely to hear, was that he needed to have a kind of structure in order to feel that, and he adopted a more conservative way of getting there, but he got there, or he's trying to get there. He's trying to get the same place that you and I are trying to get to. He's just doing it in a different way. He's taking a different track up the mountain, but
Yeah.
he's all trying to get there. And that, and that's through other people's, through a doctrine and through a dogma. But it was lovely to hear, because in the end, it was exactly the same as what all the other guests have been saying. So it was
Yeah.
amazing, and I think a lot of people are coming. We're getting some big audiences there to listen to it and to watch it. And yeah, so here's Tom with the weather. Come along to that. If you're in recovery, I run the Facebook page called AA Zoom Global Lists,
Mm-hmm.
which has become a bit of a phenomenon over the last, since lockdown. We started that, and that was part of my kind of spiritual pretentious mountain enlightenment thing with love and the mountains in Spain. And I felt a need to set up a Facebook page for Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
AA Zoom meetings, and it's become very popular, and it's very busy. And we list Zoom meetings for AA for people in, well, not 12-step recovery all over the world. Every hour there's a new meeting coming up. I also host a thing for Paul Hederman, which is about 12-step recovery, which is on twice a week, and that's on Zoom. And then we got the Shivering Denizens, which is a meeting which is happening 4 times a day, all over the world. That happens. If you want the details, I guess you can go on the AA Zoom Global Lists page, or you can contact me. As I say, I'm a filmmaker, but the film industry seems to has petered off a little bit, as I'm sure you're
Yeah.
aware, Ade.
Yeah.
And I'm desperate to make my next film. I've got a really great script, and I've been talking to investors. So if there's any potential investors out there, I've got a great horror film that
Oh,
I really
great.
keen to write and direct. It's a very exciting idea, and very topical, but it's a great one. And so I'm still wanting to do that. I'm doing writing. I'm currently in Northern Ireland. A really good friend of mine, John the camera, has let me renting his holiday cottage. I'm in a beautiful place called Cushendall
Mm-hmm.
in Northern Ireland, and it's just stunning. I love this place.
Yeah.
I'm in a really happily in a relationship with my partner Jackie, and she's in Bradford in the UK, and we seem to be very happy. Although I needed to come here, and I'm doing a bit of work. I'm doing a bit of childhood work on myself at the moment. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important, and I'm a copywriter, write advertising as well, which is how I made a buck for many years when I'm not making films. So if anyone needs a freelance copywriter, be sure to get in touch, and I'll do some
Yeah.
ads for you and stuff. But it's pretty. I'm getting a bit of work here and there, and I'm
Yeah.
just enjoying life. Like I say, I wanted to do a 2-year journey of spiritual recovery. I wanted to do step 11. If you're interested in the 12 steps, I was very focused on finding step 11, and I think I've found that, and I think I'm sort of coming to the end of that process.
Mm-hmm.
Like I say, it's just living in the here and now. So,
That's great.
yeah, yeah,
And please send me whatever links you have, and I'll add them to this Facebook video. And
sure,
uh, and just another thing that you mentioned about, here's Tom with the weather, and you brought up that you interview, people with different religions and different topics,
yeah,
and I think that's so important, especially here in the U.S. and I think in the world. We've become so closed off to other people's beliefs, and I mean to the
mm,
point of we're
mm,
not able to have, we don't have dialogue for a large part.
sure,
We condemn,
mm,
judge and condemn right away.
yep,
We
absolutely,
get cemented in our own belief structures, and we keep everyone else at at bay, and I think it's very unhealthy, and so to be able to at least listen to, and it doesn't mean that we have to agree, but it sounds like, just as you said, listening to certain people, you start to understand that at the core, that you find that there's a lot more, that they're alike, more than they're different,
I think that's a really, I'm glad you brought that up actually. And if you let me just waffle on a little bit longer, but you know, the AA Zoom Global List Facebook page has been an amazing experience for me. And it's not just a do-gooder altruistic thing. I've learned a lot, and it certainly helped with my empathy in it. And a lot of the stuff with Here's Tom of the Weather was born out of that. And I went through a different personal trauma just before lockdown started. I think in February, I had a family issue that was very traumatic. Somebody very close to me. It was very, very upsetting. And I'd been through this spiritual thing on top of my mountain in Spain, and I'd been through all that. And I kind of got to the point, I wasn't depressed, but it was like this thing. I was just thinking, all this spiritual stuff. Again, it was quite selfish, but it was like, I had to accept I had to accept some stuff that was quite painful. It was upsetting, but I accepted it, and I acted like a grown up, which is good for me. I did the right thing in a certain case. And I can remember sitting outside my house at that time, and I just thinking, I'm fed up with this stuff, and I spoke to my sponsor in AA, and he just told me that I was a bloody idiot and that I should do some service again. And I thought, yeah, that's great. Why not? Why didn't I think of that? Thanks there, mate. And that's my sponsor, John, who's been with me for 17 or so years, and he's a great guy, and he's very wise and very good guy. And I thought, well, how am I going to do some service? And I woke up the next day and out of my bed, and I just had this thing in my head saying, why don't you set up a Facebook page for Zoom meetings for people in recovery? And I thought, okay, I'll do it. And I just set it up. And it's easy to do that on Facebook. And I set this page up. And, within a few weeks, it had thousands of members, and we were promoting meetings all over the world. It just became massively popular. And just to take it back, I mean, when I was first in the fellowship, I was very opinionated, as you would imagine, as we all are. And there would be people who'd come into the meeting who would say they're addicts. And you're an AA, and oftentimes there's a lot of issues with people in AA when people from NA come in and they just say, who are these bloody addicts? They're not alcoholics. They should fuck off. Excuse my language. They shouldn't be here. And I was like that. For a long time, I was very much like that, and I was opinionated about, I'd say, how dare those people come into our meetings? And but when I started doing this Facebook page, there were people I saw who were coming into the Facebook page who were addicts. They weren't they weren't alcoholics as per se, but they were addicted to meth and heroin and stuff. And it just occurred to me that these people are suffering, and that was the thing, and I just thought, what? It doesn't matter what your affliction is. If you're in pain, I need to hold my hand out. And that was a learning experience for me. I had to break. There was it was a very fluid thing for me to have compassion for people no matter what, because we're all children. We were all children once, and we're still all children. And so no matter what your affliction is, if you're in pain, then I decided that I would just give that out. And even if the little commentary, the little voice was saying stuff, so I welcomed everyone. And I got a lot of flack from that. I got a lot of flack from people in AA who were just saying, well, we should only give it to people who are alcoholics. And I got all that stuff, and I got all the traditions Nazis, and I got all of these people who came after me. And I just said, you know what? It's an emergency. This lockdown is an emergency for people who are in recovery, need to go to meetings, regardless of what their affliction is. We should welcome them. And we did. And the Shivering Denizens does that. And the Facebook page does that. I don't care what your addiction is and what your problem is, you're welcome. Because I believe that nobody gets left behind. Nobody should get left behind, and that we're all one, and that we need to. And it's like I say, again, it's that whole thing, Christians need to remember that Jesus had dinner with the prostitutes and the lepers. And, and oftentimes addicts and alcoholics forget where they come from, and they come into this fellowship, they come into AA particularly, and they start building themselves back up, and things get better, and they forget that they were on their knees and how much pain they were in. and they lose perspective and they lose the fact and having empathy for people who, whatever they are, they come in, they're on their knees, they're living on the street, they're feeling upset, they're not happy, they've lost the family, they've lost everything, and they have nowhere to go. And that's a terrible feeling, because I've been there. I've been there. I've had that, you know, like the Beatles say, oh, that magic feeling, nowhere to go. And that feeling is a terrible feeling. So, you know, I try to remember that. I try to remember that we need to have empathy and put ourselves in shoes. You know, positively 4th Street, isn't it? With Bob Dylan song. I love that. You know, there's a line in there. I think it's what a drag it is to live. You know, to be in. You should try and live in my shoes, because then one day you'd see what it's like for what a drag it is for me to live to see you. And that's very much. I think it's that empathy is like to remember. I think I've butchered those lines, but it's just have empathy. Have empathy. Have empathy for other people, regardless. And it's those different. And when we start making differences between each other, as we said with like us and them, that's a dangerous road. That turns into hate and division. And I think, you know, it's just letting go, letting God. If that's the case, you know, if there is a God, then that's the best way of doing it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, so that's a good place to end. And
sure.
And yeah, please send me those links, and I'll put them in the body of this video.
Sure.
Also, you know, I'll send you a copy of the Zoom copy of this video. I do a little bit of intro and exit, so I'll cut, you know, I polish it just a little bit, and I'll send you a Dropbox link if that's okay. You can download the video, and this one will also be on Facebook, you know, as well. It's up now. So, okay, again, if you're joining, this is Guided Meditations and More. My name is Ade Richardson. I'm your host, and today we're with David Gilbank, and talking about his spiritual journey. And we covered so many topics today. So if you're just joining, you can go back and watch. And you know, I'm going to post some links of where you can, you know, learn more about what David's doing, and possibly, you know, I think you can find him on Facebook. And where else can people get? Is that the best way for people to get in contact with you? Is it Facebook?
I've got an email address. I'll send my email address.
Okay, yeah. So Facebook, email, and if you are new to Guided Meditations and More, if you like or follow the page, you'll get the updates and notifications. If you have any comments or questions for me, please send me a direct message to my inbox, and you can send messages below this video. Let me know where you're watching from. So again, David, thank you so much this was really delightful, you know, spending this time to getting to know you, and you know, and thank you for joining. So
my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Everyone.
Thanks very much. Cheers, mate. Thank you.